So, good morning, everyone. I can see around 65 participants have logged in, so there are more to come in. First of all, on the outset, let me introduce myself. I am Rajeshri. I am the principal of ERNDCI Institute of Technology. ERNDCI Institute of Technology is the academic arm of CDAC Trivandrum. We are located in Trivandrum, of course. And we are running two postgraduate programs in MTech in VLSI and embedded systems and cyber forensics and information security. So these are full-time programs affiliated to the Kerala Technical University. So we have our students here in large numbers attending, of course, and we also have some outside participants. So I welcome all the participants to this webinar, and it is my pleasure to also welcome our speaker for the day, Dr. Nisha Haridas. She is a senior lead systems engineer, Qualcomm, Bangalore. She is basically an MTech in VLSI design from Amrita School of Engineering and a PhD from NIT Calicut. She has experience in reconfigurable and low complexity design and implementation of digital filters, generation of patterns for built-in self-test, FPGA-based EDA tools, TCL scripting for testing tool functionalities on Linux and Windows platforms, and so on. Dr. Nisha Haridas, Nisha, we are very grateful to you for having spared your time to share your knowledge and expertise to our students and also the general public at large. We welcome you to the session and we hope all of you have a wonderful session. Of course, I hope I mentioned today's session's topic, Basic Embedded System Concepts for SoC Architecture. Our webinar series is on embedded system development and its application. So once again, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the session. I hope you have a very enriching experience, a very interactive experience. And I hand over this forum to our speaker, Dr. Nisha Haridas. Over to you, Nisha.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Rajeshri. Thank you, ERNDC staff for arranging this webinar and inviting me for this session. So as principal has mentioned, I am systems lead engineer at SoC architecture team at Qualcomm. So I have been with Qualcomm for over 2.5 years, total 6 years of industrial experience. So in this today's session, I like to cover, so let me present my screen. Okay. So good morning, everyone. So today I actually intend to cover some overview of concept that one would need to design an SoC. So I would like to cover some architecture, microarchitecture details in that. Okay. And do let me know if I'm going too fast or it's not relatable to you. So what I would like to do today is introduce various SoC markets and some major blocks in SoC today. So that I would like to touch upon at a very high level and familiarize on the various SoC business lines and markets that we have today. And then also I would like to go upon the major components that would need that would satisfy different markets. And then a little deeper into the processor, caches, main memory system, parts of the SoC, and then other system level components that would be useful to design an SoC, a complete SoC. Okay. So where do you think the embedded systems that you design are? Obviously, as you are student, faculty, and people interested in this domain, you would obviously know where all you can find such embedded things, right? So, but what I wanted to emphasize here is look at the wide range of SoCs and where all it is catering to, right? This is not future, this is today. So we have markets like virtual reality, automobiles, mobile and the Internet of Things, right? Internet of Things now it brings it everywhere, like to the hands of everyone, no, right? So, so yes. So I hope you all have, you have seen all these. So mobiles are the most common ones, but you still have other components, other, market SOC markets that you can see here, and much more. Okay. And what are the major components that would, make an SOC? So I would have rather liked it to an interactive session, but as I cannot see anyone, I'll go ahead. So here we have hardware components. Okay, we have hardware components. On top of it, we have an OS and application software. That will be the user-facing software, right? And the majorly, I would like to focus on hardware aspects. It's not that others are not important. It has to be, this is not scope of current presentation. And what all hardware components do you think it would have? Right. It is not just the CPU. It has memory module, other modules for multimedia. We have, if you have to touch the touch screen, it will have some kind of sensor hub. And of course, the connectivity. We don't see wires today, right? Everything is going wireless. So we need Bluetooth, Wi-Fi kind of connectivities. And power management. So we want our devices to last long. So this is also an important aspect in an SOC design. Okay. And as I said, the range of the SOCs that devices we have today is very wide. It starts from handheld devices, wearables, to mobiles I have shown here, but there are more. Automobiles, computer systems like laptops, servers, right? It is very wide. And if you look at the OS part of it, you will have a very deeply embedded OS with firmware kind of functionality and rich OS. And these would have microcontrollers. You must be aware of Cortex M3 kind of ARM Cortex M3 processor. So maybe based on that, it could be. And there are very wide range of choices for processors also that we know, right? And it goes all the way up to application processors and multi-core systems. Okay. And just so that we get a quick recap on what these are. What is a microprocessor? It will have a simple logical execution units, control unit, registers, and memory. So this is the basic processing part of it. And you would have data movements from input device to memory and output device, right? I hope everyone is familiar with this. And a microcontroller, it will have some of these embedded within that chip. So some of the the interfaces, IOs, timers are integrated along with the processing part. So that would make it a microcontroller. Okay. And finally, we have an SOC. It will embed multiple subsystems. So each in itself is an embedded system. These are embedded systems, and multiple such subsystems form a system on chip. So it would cater to a particular function. And it could be actually, so when you design an SOC, we should also look at the profitability of, so finally everything comes to a business. So if we are able to cater to multiple business lines using a same chip, that would really help in the cost effectiveness. So this might not be for a single business market like a mobile. It could cater to multiple ones using a same platform. Okay. Yeah, just this is not the complete spectrum, but it shows some major players in the processor world. So ARM, of course, leading the way. There are multiple kinds of processors coming up, including the, some are based on the, you must have heard about RISC-V and the open source ISA. So some are using the open source ISA to build the RISC-V processors now. So other players we know, like ARM as the leader in application processors, NVIDIA, we have GPUs. Even Qualcomm has certain in-house processors that cater to GPU functionality, neural processing. So yes. So let me just start with a mobile SoC component here. Okay. So what do you think? What all should be there as part of a mobile SoC? Of course, the first one that I am showing here, this is the application processor. Okay, application processor, and this so this comes from ARM mostly. Most of them use ARM technology. What I have shown here, Cortex A55, Cortex A75 are the high-end application processor of ARM. JIC is an interrupt controller. This also, JIC is actually proprietary of ARM. And there are other component, other accelerators, you can call it, apart from CPU. CPU is the processing engine that most of us are familiar with, and GPU is a variant of that processing where it would need some kind of SIMD vector processing and other very large word processing. The instruction word itself becomes very big, and the pattern of data that comes to GPU is different. And you have other multimedia masters, so they work on pixels. So just by the reason that they work on different data, we have multiple types of processing engines in our system. And if you are aware of virtual memory, you have something called MMU, Memory Management Unit, to convert physical to virtual to physical memory. Okay, and the physical memory actually sits in, and usually these are external components. What is there in black? Okay, here. So they actually sit external to the SoC, but it is an integral part of the processing that happens here. So this is the memory storage unit. I've shown here as LPDDR. It could be any memory. And then we have an interconnect. So the interconnect is the, you must have heard about various protocols and NOCs, right? Network on chip. So they are, so it could be simple bus metrics to NOC. It could be anything here. So there are components that could transfer the data from the processing engine to the final memory. And of course, we can see this memory is shared, memory and interconnect is shared among these processing engines. And you can see a memory controller. So there are aspects in memory controller that that aid to the performance of a particular process. So a process, basically it would start from the processing engine, and there are performance aspects here, like the frequency at which it can run and other things. So frequency is the very high level thing that I can say, but there are other aspects that that matters in performance from a process. engine. And at the final stage, which is it facing to the DDR, there we have a memory controller, which has a major influence on performance, that I would say. Okay, it actually it makes the process here to the commands to the memory. So what goes from memory controller to the actual memory are commands. Okay, and then there are other smaller infrastructure units like debug. If you so that is not a user facing feature, but we need to have some kind of observability when you design a system. So debug and tracing is part of that. Okay, I move on. So these are various processing engines that we have that I was mentioning. We have a CPU, GPU. We have some specialized engine for neural processing. As now we know, AI is a hot word today, and there are AI accelerators. So that comes into the category of neural processing engines. We have DSPs and any other accelerator you can think of. So they all cater to specific functions in a system. Okay, and I would be focusing on the CPU. Okay, one more thing that I can mention here. So we have various profiles. So ARM is a major player, as I had said earlier, and we have major profiles of ARM processors that we can see. Most of you must be aware of this. So we have Cortex M3 kind of system, which is lowest gate count. It is deeply embedded use, and it is a simple pipeline unit. I mean a processor. Then we have some real-time profiles. So they cater to some real-time needs here. It would need some kind of error correction. So as it has to perform in the real time. So the error correction and the safety would be high. So so I guess this goes in mostly in automobile specific safety features of automobile. So automobile, it could be autonomous driving or infotainment. So for autonomous driving, as you would be knowing, it 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 requires some kind of safety features. So we cannot tolerate any errors in that. So the ECC and other other greater variants of ECC would be used here. Okay, and finally we have the application profile. It usually it uses OS. So the OS runs on this application CPU. It would function on virtual memory. So we need a memory management support. So usually we have high performance, and there are other there are two categories in application profile. Some we want for power saving, and some we want for high performance. So some of the applications the user develop might go into the high performance core, and some would go to the low power consuming cores. So basically what I had shown earlier, A75 and 55, right? So these are high performance cores. These are low power cores. And in ARM, we have something called dynamic queue, dynamic shared unit. So here we have the processors like high performance processors and low power processors in various combinations, if you see here. So it could be single high performance core and all the others. So we can have total 8 cores here. Okay, and it could be any combination that is shown here. Okay, So basically this is the multi-core application processor subsystem that is shown. And you can see A55, for A55 I have just shown a pipeline structure. So you can see how many pipelines it has. No, I mean, it is different from the traditional ones we have seen, 5-stage pipeline, 3-stage pipeline. We have many pipelines, many stages for the pipeline here. And other important components here, you can see, apart from the 8 cores in this cluster, where there are some other components. We can see some caches, some bus interfaces, Snoop filter. So we can see, we can just go over, maybe I would be covering caches and Snoop at a later point here. So basically this is the CPU subsystem that we know. Yeah, virtual memory is, so the address, so we know like a particular memory is limited. The physical memory is limited here. Okay, so so I am not sure of the latest memory. This one, I think it. Okay, so whatever it is, so the physical memory is always limited. But as the the processing requirements increase and the memory and the processing capability and multiple processing engine at the same time. So if we want to cater so many instructions and data, we might have to have lot more memory than we actually can have as a physical memory. Okay, so only the address will be changed to the virtual memory. So it is like okay, I have a slide, I think. Let me go there. So if a particular processing engine initiates a virtual address, there is a translation mechanism that it is called memory management unit. Here we have a page table, which is a lookup table which can map every virtual address to the physical address. Okay, in the physical domain in the main memory. So you can see that virtual memory has got more number of bits. Okay, it would be if we need more, however higher memory we need, we will have. So I have seen 52, around 52. I think ARM supports 52 bits of memory, virtual memory, and then we can translate it to the actual physical address bits. Okay, so that we can actually address a smaller amount of memory from the virtual domain. Did I answer it?
Yes, we can continue the session now.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay. Now let us look at memory. So memory technology, we have two kinds, two major. We have actually subcategories in each of them. So we can just see at a high level what is the difference between DRAM and SRAM. So we all know, so DRAM is a single transistor, single capacitor system. Okay. So the transistor, this is the storage part. Okay, capacitors have the storage when it loads, and then transistor is to access the particular bit. We have to enable this particular transistor row because we have a single row of multiple transistors to store a single cache line or a single memory block. So, and particular bit line to access this stored value. This stored bit can be accessed using the bit line. Okay, and and what is the problem here? We have a capacitor. Okay, it loses charge over time. We know the property of the capacitor. It leaks, and to retain this particular memory, this particular transistor has to be refreshed. Okay, so every time you need to refresh this particular cell so that this memory is retained, this bit is retained. And in case of SRAM, you can see you have a cross coupled inverters. This is basically 4 transistors, okay, making it total 6 per bit, 6 transistor per bit. And you have 4 transistor for storage. This cross coupled inverter stores a single bit of information, and you can access them using these 2 transistors. Okay. And also one thing to be noted is the SRAMs are costly, but they are fast, and DRAMs are cheap but slow. Right? That is how we introduce memory hierarchy into our system. So what happens is the main memory is made of DRAM, and whatever internal RAM, so main memory sits outside the chip. So you can see here, it is outside. Okay, and your caches are internal to the chip. Okay, and whatever is there within the chip, we have SRAMs. And why do we need memory hierarchy now? So we'll see later that we have some cache performance things that would result in a hierarchy, this kind of hierarchy. So basically, if you have a processing engine, you will have a small L1 cache which can give smaller latency to whatever it is processing. The L2 cache, for it will be bigger than L1 cache, and because of the placement, it will take more time to access. And a level 3 cache. So we can see what these are. So actually, when you organize them, it could be actually a single unified instruction and data cache. In that case, the maintenance operations would be a little bit more tricky. So the software that interfaces with the drivers, they'll have to take care of how this, or the cache controller. It could be in hardware or software, the cache controller, or the software that drives it would have to take care of fetching, prefetching, and writing to the memory. Okay, in this interface. And it could be we have other levels of caches. So what we see in ARM-based systems is that the level 1 cache is usually differentiated. The I cache and D cache gets differentiated, and L2 cache is unified I and D cache. Okay. And when you have a multi-core system, we have some private caches, okay, and a shared higher level caches. It could be anyway. The L2, this is just an indicative diagram. It need not be L2 that is shared. It could be L3. L2 can also be private. Private to, so we had seen clusters, no? So we had 75 and A55 as clusters in ARM-based system. Right. So yeah, the high performance could be one cluster, the low power could be another cluster, and each cluster could have a private L2, and total CPU subsystem could have a shared L3. It could be that way. So I'm not specifying which processor or the which processor category has which kind of structure. But in general, we have this in ARM. So others, it might differ. Interested students and faculty, you can just go and check how it is implemented differently. But I would like to say there are different ways in which this memory hierarchy is arranged in different processors. That is basically their architecture to choose. So going into the cache, so we have, okay, I have shown, I think, set associative caches here. So let me just clarify what is each of these. There are three, you can say, yeah, three major ways in which you can visualize the caches, actually implement the cache. It could be direct mapped, set associative, or fully associative. When you say directly map, each block in a memory will actually come and sit in a particular place that is reserved for that cache line. It will not go and sit anywhere else. Okay, so this is direct one-to-one mapping. And if you see fully associative, there is no restriction. This cache line can come and sit anywhere in the cache. Okay, these are three different caches I have shown here. Okay, it's not part of a single diagram. These are three things. So if you say, okay, way associative, it could be any number of ways. It could be two-way, four-way, eight-way. If you say two-way associative, you will divide the full cache into, if you have 32 KB, you will divide it into each of 16 units of maybe 8, whatever is the block size. So it comes as a function of the block size, if you say as part of memory. So if you say you have 16 blocks, and you will see 8 blocks here. Okay, and each 2 blocks can place the particular cache line. So this particular cache line can go anywhere in this shaded region, shaded blocks, not these. Okay. Yeah, and we can see here the formula. Cache size is number of blocks. B is 2 raised to B bytes per cache block. E lines per set. A single set can have 2 lines, so this is two-way cache, two-way set associative cache, because it has got 2 lines. Okay, and S is how many sets it has. So if it is 2 raised to S sets for S, so the total cache size can be B into E into S. Okay. Yeah, this is what I have explained here. So sets, base, tags, you should be clear on these. So you will have tags. So what is tag do? Tags actually help us identify. It is like an address to this block. So this is the tag that would we can identify that this is the particular cache line that we want. So there are other bits like valid. Valid is something that it's if you want to know it is actually there in the memory, or is it consistent. If you know a particular line is present in the cache, in a particular cache, it will be valid. Okay. So these are basic cache concepts that you would know. So why do we need caches?
Temporary storage.
Yeah, we need to fetch the memory into why do we also I'll put it in another way. So why do we need to store memory in cache? We have a memory already, so why do we need that?
Post processing.
Correct.
In case if there is some power, something like some error, I mean, and if the data gets lost or something like that, like for quick recovery or something like a, to have some sort of memory of the past.
Yeah, I think you are talking in terms of software. Actually, here, here actually we want to increase the processing speed. Okay,
Yeah.
we want to increase the processing speed of a particular processor. We have registers for the fastest access, and we cannot go all the way to the main memory just to get some data that we might have already used at a previous instruction. So that is a principle of temporal locality that we would know, right? So that means a program, there is a chance a particular data get accessed more often. Okay, more often when you have a smaller set of, so a smaller set of data, there is a chance of more frequency of usage. So that is called temporal locality. So we want some of those data to be close to the processor so that it can access faster. Okay, so yes, and as you said, right, it has some kind of past experience. So if you see in the past you have used it, maybe you want to use it again, right? That is temporal locality, correct? And there is also concept of spatial locality. Sometimes if we see a block of data in a memory, we are accessing it. The cache controller could actually be intelligent enough to take the next word also along with it, okay, as a burst, or it could be in a sequence, and the cache controller knows the processor would need that particular memory at some time in the future. That is called spatial locality. Okay, so we have seen some addresses close to what we need. The controller could fetch that also, so that it can satisfy the spatial locality principle. Okay, and the caches have a basic unit of a cache is a block, or line, cache line. So when you say it is a hit, what does it mean? Can anyone answer?
Means it is found.
Yes, the data what we need, what the processor require is actually present in the cache. So if it is what is a miss, it is not there, and what will it have to do then if it is a miss? It has to, yeah, someone is answering.
Fetch from main memory, I think. Then
Correct. Yes, right. It has to go to the next level cache or the main memory. Okay. So this is what I was talking about, cache performance. We have hit rate and hit latency. So any cache hit is so at any level of cache we have the so for any memory this is true. If we see that particular data is present, it is a hit, and the time it takes to load the data if it is a hit is one number, and if you have a miss, it will have another latency, because it will have to, if it is a miss, it will have to fetch from the larger memory, okay, whatever it is, higher level cache or main memory, and then so the overall average memory access time for a processor is hit rate into hit latency plus miss rate into miss latency, and this drives the performance. Okay, and some aspects that that you can see that would influence the cache performance are miss rate, right? Obviously we don't want the data to be missed. So what does that mean? We want a larger cache size, okay, but if it is larger cache size, we know that we have a set associative and direct map fully associative. If it is a fully associative, that cache could be anywhere. The time it takes to identify where the tag is. So we have to identify the tag, we have to fetch it. So the identification of the tag in that particular cache will be, it will be more. So that time becomes more, right? So when you try to reduce the miss rate, now the hit latency has become more, right? Now what happens? So there are, so we can have, it could be bigger block size, bigger caches, higher associativity, right? Then there is something called miss penalty. Miss penalty is the, no, the penalty that has to be paid to go to the higher level cache. So if we have to go to the main memory, it will take too long. So a higher, so I told L2 is higher than L1. So if we can just have an L2 in between, and we can have a larger L2, larger size of L2, and if at all it, if it happens to be there in L2, we can actually reduce the miss penalty. Okay. And there are other things like MMUs. If you, okay, so if you want to avoid translation, so if you have a virtual addressing mechanism, you could actually put that later than the cache, so that the address translation penalty will not be there in indexing the cache. Is there any question?
One question comes is, what is higher associativity?
Yeah. Okay. So what happens with us higher associativity? So if you can, so if you have a two-way associative, I told it could be anywhere here, right? So if you have a higher associativity, it could actually reduce the conflict misses. And greater associativity, it can come at the cost of increased hit time. So if you, what do you mean by higher associativity? It is like, it could be these 4 blocks could place this particular cache line, right? So to find out this is you know, where this particular block size is, it will so that is the hit time increase. Okay, it will increase the latency of hit latency. Okay, can you repeat that if you want to?
Yes. If we want to increase the cache size, block size for cache, so which part of memory we will take? Means from main memory we will take some part, or how it can be done?
No. So the block size for a particular cache. So this is all okay. Design time. Okay. You cannot increase the block size in the, when you are actually running a program. Okay. If you so the question is larger block size. How do you?
How means it will, it should be made during design time only, or
Yes.
later on
Yes.
also we can?
No, we cannot increase it later. No, it is a design time. So when you design a processor and associated caches, you will have to fix what is the cache size.
Okay.
What I was telling is, it is actually a function of the block size. If you have larger block size, what happens is it will reduce misses, right? So we can say like this: if you have a larger block size, more part of the memory can be brought into a single block. Okay, there are multiple cache lines here, right? Multiple cache lines could be fetched, and the same tag could be used. So if you see a tag comparison and a tag match, you can easily identify a particular line is existing in this block or not, right? So obviously, if you have higher number of blocks here, you can expect the misses to be low. So because you have more amount of memory sitting in a particular block. Okay. Okay. Let me move on. So also all these are also based on, there are multiple ways you can actually have the policies. Okay, policies like what do you want to do when you have a when you have a write back to the cache. So when you what does the processor do? It could read from the cache, it could write to the cache basically, right? So when you write to the cache, what do you want to do with the updation of the main memory? Do you want to do it then and there, or do you want to wait for the block return to the block, and modified cache block is returned to the main memory only when it is replaced? So when like we have very limited amount of cache memory, right? It is not as big as main memory. Obviously, if we need another set of data, we will have to replace some of those blocks. Agree? So so if we want to replace, when you replace it with some kind of algorithms, it could be a random replacement, it could be least recently used. All these you will have to decide initially when you architect the your processor or your associated SoC. Okay, so when you have such replacement, only then you will write back to the main memory. So that policy is called write back. Okay, you want to write back only when you get replaced. But write through is something that when you write to a cache, it is immediately updated to the main memory. Okay. These are policies that you would each of them has their own pros and cons. You will have to evaluate what you want to do. Okay, just that I'm familiarizing what are the cache policies that you could have. Then as I mentioned, we could have private caches, each core having its own cache, and a shared cache. So what do you think is a advantage of having private cache?
Yeah, same comes to the speed, processing speed for every core.
Yeah, right. And what could be the disadvantage?
The cost of
Size,
Huh?
maybe memory size we are using, it will increase the chip size also.
Yeah, you could actually divide the single cache into equal L2 caches. No? So the thing is, when you have a private L2 cache, a core that is updating the L2 cache would not be updated in core 1's L2 cache, or rather any of these, right? Someone writes to it, these caches are unaware and these cores are unaware. So any program that happens, it could go to core 0, core 1, core 2, or core 3. The higher level software, or they don't have the information of which core is going to process your program or your instruction. So for that, we need some policies there. Okay, in case of such mechanism, that is called coherency. What does coherency mean? It is a scenario where you have multiple copies of same data in different caches simultaneously, and if the processors are allowed to update their own copies freely, it will be inconsistent with respect to other cores. You can say the memory view of it. So actually in caches, we are not doing nothing, but we are actually prefetching some of the memory, some of the main memory components, and storing it local to the processor. The processor's view of the memory data for that particular address is now different. The address a core 0 uses for the same data, it sees a different data in that address, and core 1 sees a different data. So that is a very inconsistent view of memory for each of the processors. Okay. Now we have some rules that govern some how these multiple caches can interact with each other to solve this problem. This is called cache coherency protocol. Okay, you have Snoop based, directory based. There are other software based mechanisms, but I'm not intending to cover them. Interested people can look up. So now, what is the idea of snooping? So I can introduce what is snooping. Snooping is actually reading from the bus. A particular processor can read from this. This is a bus, okay, connecting the processors. It can read whatever data is there in this cache through this bus. Okay, so that is what is meant by snooping. And what is directory based? You can have a directory, a lookup table, where you can have a list where which cache contains what memory. So you can easily look up the directory and say, okay, this particular cache line is shared between processor 0 and processor 2. So if a processor 1 wants to make a write, okay, write to that particular line, you will have to nullify the other two caches. That is called invalidation. You need to say that now, okay, now your data is not valid, your cache lines are not valid, because processor 1, I am going to write something to that particular line. Whatever you see is not correct, so they invalidate. So that is a invalidation mechanism. So that is what I'm talking here. Some you can see state diagram. So there are many things like this, they have evolved over generations. Valid state diagram protocol. Okay, Snoop protocol. This is MSI protocol. There is a MESI and MOSI protocols. So basically, they are they represent the states in which a particular cache can be. So the basic one, I'm not sure if you are aware or if you have seen this. Okay. So there are two states in which a cache line can be. It is valid or invalid. When do you say it is invalid? When when it is shared and it is a wrong data that a particular processor can see. Okay. A particular processor can see it as a valid data or an invalid data. So what this diagram shows is, when you have a processor write, okay, processor wants to write to an invalid cache line, okay, what happens is a bus write. Bus write is nothing but a snoop. Okay, what I'm going to do is I am going to write back to the cache that has got this, and then as I update that cache write, this becomes a valid line. Okay, so for that, this is the invalidation protocol. So for all these things, we need some bus protocols that can support these kind of transactions. Okay, you must be aware of AXI, AMBA protocols, right? Okay, so basic AXI protocol doesn't support these. We have to go to coherency supported protocols like ACE, and so even ACE doesn't support CHI. So that is a coherency based protocol from AMBA that that can support these kind of transactions. Okay, invalidation and other cache maintenance operations. Okay. And when you read something, a valid data, what happens? A processor wants to read a valid data. There is no change here. You can see a dash. It means there is no change to the cache line whatsoever, because I'm only reading that particular cache line and it is already valid. Okay. And if you write to a particular valid line, what happens? The processor wants to write to a cache line which is valid but shared. Okay, valid and shared, I should say, because the valid is seen by multiple. So when you write to it, it has changed now. The data in this particular cache line has changed. So it has to initiate a bus write. Bus write means it has to update the other caches that another processor has updated your cache. You can read it from this particular line. so that the other processor P1 cache lines get updated. Okay. And there are because of there are other ways you can do. So this is a basic one. If you're interested, you can actually go to the higher versions of these cache coherence protocol. There are exclusive state. So what does that mean is, so if there is a cache line that is not shared between two caches, you need not actually do this invalidation, right? The invalidation operation is the overhead there. So I can tell that, okay, I know that this cache exclusively belongs to this processor, this only P0 processor. Now, if I make any modification on that cache, I need not actually intimate other processors or other caches or even the main memory. Okay. So here, what I'm talking about is the multi-core system where this particular caches are being shared, or it is in a the process. You can say that a program is shared between a multi-core processor and it uses all these caches with a shared main memory. Okay. Okay. Now that's all about caches. Can I move to the main memory? I think the time is already approaching, so I'll just go on to the main memory. Okay, so whatever we were looking here, no, we had looked at the CPU with all the caches. Now we are going to the main memory. I had already mentioned it is DRAM technology, memory technology. And you can see there is a memory controller that interfaces the processing engine to the main memory. Okay, the memory controller is the part that actually improves efficiency of. It has two parts to it. If we need higher efficiency from the memory controller, we can actually schedule the processing commands or transaction that actually comes here. And it is you can see that this particular line, no, the bus is of higher width than this. Yes, so this is a smaller, so there is a bottleneck. The memory interface, which is off chip, okay, till the memory controller, this is a single SoC. So the off chip data transfer is costly, and we usually have a smaller number of bits here. It's 32. I don't know if we have 64-bit interfaces, channel interfaces. So mostly they are smaller interfaces than the incoming bus. Okay, so this has to be intelligent enough to schedule the transactions so that we can get the maximum hit here. So the hit and miss, everything is similar as we heard in SRAM. So here also, if we get a hit, we have a particular latency. If it is a miss, it is a different latency. So just demystifying what a channel, rank, bank, row, column. So memory is arranged. So arranged in a well organized manner as rows, columns, and each memory is banks of multiple arrays, and each bank, okay, this is a one bank. Each bank is arranged in a rank here. Okay, rank, you can see it could be, so it is you can see two faces of the same DIMM or a chip. Okay, so this is a chip select. A chip select can select rank. Okay, chip select 1 selects one rank, and chip select 2 select the second rank of the memory. Okay, and you have a address bus, data bus. Address is where you will send the IDs, like you have a chip select has already gone. Now you will have IDs for bank, row, column. So you have a bank address. You can see, okay, you can see there is a bank address, there is a row, okay, we should understand which is a row, and a column. So row also we had seen earlier, right? So to have the DRAM, we had a row select bit. We had seen a row select bit to select a particular DRAM row. How do I have it here? Okay. Okay. You have a decoder. It decodes, once it has decoded which bank it is, okay, it decodes which is the row. The row address will find the row, and that row is read into a row buffer, okay. And once we get the column address, one of the cell, this is the single cell where the row and column decoder meets, okay, that is getting sensed out, okay. Column decoder, it sends out as a single data bus. So we have a single cell, if you say it is 8-bit, okay, 8-bit data is a single cell, it can be extracted out, okay. This could be for a read or a write if you want. So these are different. So if you have a row address, so if you have a column address, okay, if you know that a particular data you have already fetched, so the thing is, so you need a first data. We have fetched this particular row 1, okay, into the row buffer. If you again need another column of the same row, you need to only give the column address row, okay. So this is the cache latency, which is a column address probe latency. The DDR latency, if you have already accessed a particular row, you need only the column access latency to get the data out. Now, if that is not open, if you have not chosen this row, you will have to first choose the whatever row it is, and then take the column. It will be row address plus the column address latency. That will be to take the particular data out. So that will count as a DDR access latency. Now, if it is already open, some other row is open, okay, the row 0, I'm calling this as row 1, and this is row 3, okay. Row 1 is open, but my data is in row 3. I'll have to pre-charge it. These are basically capacitors, right? So you have to pre-charge this row back, okay. So it means this is empty now when you pre-charge. Now again read the third row and the cell, whatever column address we want, we can decode the column and read the data, okay. So we can see that these all determine the DDR efficiency, what I was talking about, okay. So if the DDR controller, the memory controller, is intelligent enough to actually give back-to-back data from the same row, you will have lower latency, right? So that is called scheduling, the command scheduling. Okay, this just shows the channel, how the channel. So per command and address, you will have this is a single channel. You can see multiple data channels, but channel is single because you have single command and data address addressing multiple DRAM chips. Okay, did I cover? Okay. Yeah, so this is a data movement that I was talking about. Memory controller will issue the row RAS. Now it will address the column address, that is a column read command. So this is the activate command. So I told you the memory controller can issue only commands, not instructions. It is specific to the DRAM. It is called activate command, read command, okay. And we have after that we have the read processing, and this is the off-chip data transfer that is coming out of the DRAM chip to the memory controller, and from memory controller it goes back to the processing engine. Okay, I think I covered this. Okay, and then there are other system level aspects that I couldn't cover here. So so there are interconnects bus protocols that you could actually get hold of. At least knowing AXI protocol will be very helpful in in understanding the whole of the system. And I mentioned some of the coherency related transactions that only CHI can support, right? These are on chip, by the way. If you have multiple chips and multiple chips, conversing with each other, you will have different kind of interconnect technology to cater that. Okay. Then, as someone asked, there is virtualization concept because a single physical memory would not be able to cater, and virtualization in a way also gives way to security. Okay, just go on to the documents that you can get hold of on security. This is also a very important aspect in an SOC design. Okay, security and the vulnerability of SOCs is going on increasing day by day. So this is a very important aspect that you could actually look into. And others are debug. We have the trace mechanisms and the debug mechanisms. So there are infrastructure in every SOC to debug them. It could be while development, after development. Okay, so at every stage, finally we want bug-free and fault-free system. So debug is also a very important component. And power management. Okay, so low power techniques from the low level like VLSI concepts of clock gating and what all we know about, and up to the frequency of operation of each core. So I had mentioned about A75 and A55 having different capability. So we know that frequency of operation is inversely proportional, no, to the power. So if you have higher frequency, you will have higher, sorry, it is directly proportional. So if you have higher frequency, you will have higher power dissipation. So if you need to manage that, you should actually opt for a lower frequency for a different core if you have such a mechanism. So, and the scheduling of the instructions. So if you have a process, you have to schedule lower performance required threads into a particular core and higher performance required thread into a particular core, so that difference would give ability to actually control power, and many more. The list is not complete, and I don't think I will be able to cover. It is actually you can have a good read on various topics, and it is a very vast domain and interesting domain. Just go through them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now if there is any doubt regarding the topics covered, the participants can put it in the chat if there are any doubts. I think there is one question already there. How we decide ISA to be used on the basis of processor like RISC-V?
Okay, ISA.
Yes.
So yeah, actually ISA till now, right, when we have till some kind of RISC-V and open source ISA has come into picture, it is proprietary of any processor vendor that have. So ARM has its own ISA. So every processor is was associated with an ISA till up to recently, until this has been opened up by RISC-V. RISC-V actually is an open source ISA, and you can use it to develop a custom processing engine. Okay, so it is not, I don't think it is fully developed. The specifications are out. You can take a look at the RISC-V specification. So there is actually guideline and standard that is being developed to go on to RISC-V, and some vendors like Sci-Fi is a known one. So there are others. Okay, there are universities that have developed processors based on RISC-V. Commercial vendor Sci-Fi has entered here, and they are developing something based on RISC-V. So it is not for us to decide an ISA. It would usually, if we are going to design it from the scratch a processor, yes, you can select an open source ISA and design it. But if you are going to choose a Cortex processor, for example, the ISA is attached to it. So you have thumb or ARM ISA that comes along with the ARM Cortex processors.
Okay. So, is there any other questions we can post in the chat? Okay, so I think it is clear to all, and so I think we can.
I think we are well on time.
Some questions are coming.
Okay.
What is the scope of using embedded system along with FPGA?
So which embedded system are we talking about? So if you are looking into M3, it in itself is it has got the capability to function in a particular any specific function that it requires. But you so FPGA usually is for emulating any mm, any process. So you can actually need not combine them. From my point of view, they are two different things. So we will choose a embedded system like a Cortex M3 or something for a specific need and a specific application. And FPGA, when we are trying on a new design, we could actually try on it for multiple times for the saying that because it is reconfigurable, you can actually try on it many times. So you would use an FPGA for that. So, but FPGAs have also become mainstream application centric one. So if you don't want to use a separate processor from a vendor, you can actually do it on an FPGA also. And FPGAs are, of course, come with their own tools, so software tools and development platforms. So yeah, you can actually either choose between them.
So the next section question is, what is page table fault?
Okay. It's not fault, I think. You are telling, okay. So when you have a virtual address, I had mentioned, we have something called MMU to manage this, right? So if something, some address is missing here, okay, in the page tables are also, limited in size, right? And since it is limited in size, it will not have everything. It will be initially prefetched. Okay, some of the addresses we actually prefetch into. It is also, you cannot say it is a cache. It is a cache concept where you actually fetch some of the memory and put it in a page table. So there, it is like it is most probable addresses that they could actually look for to translate it to physical address. So this actually reduces the, it is a translation mechanism also, and it is a, it reduces the latency in finding out the table. Actually reduces the latency when you actually prefetch some of the addresses here. Okay, and if you don't see that address here, it will go and again fetch some more from the memory. This is not actually like this. You can actually go and look at the SMMU V2 or V3 specification from ARM. But it will go on to a higher page table or the main memory to fetch the required address. If it is not there, it would come as a fault and it would go to the storage space. Okay, disk storage in case of mobile memory, and or any other flash memory for I think PCs or yeah. So so that could be a reason when you don't find that particular address for translation in a page table. That results in a page fault. Is it clear?
Yes, okay. And one more question is there. What is the solution for data dependency with respect to data hazards?
Okay, solution for data dependency. Yeah. Okay, so when you have such dependence, no, one thing you can do is you can have a no operation in between. That is up to the compiler or no assembly language to actually rearrange the instructions that goes to the processor, to the pipeline stage of the processor. Okay, in a manner that there is no dependency. It could be either insertion of no operation or insertion of another instruction that has no dependence on the previous instruction. So up to the execution stage, this or the write back stage, you will not get this particular data here, right? Is my pointer there?
No, the pointer cannot be. Yes, it is not.
Okay, so this particular R3, what I'm showing, so it is not available up to the write back stage of the pipeline. Okay, so until that time, you might need to either stall it. Stalling is not a good option because it will reduce the performance, or you could insert some instruction. Okay, it could be it could be out of order. No, out of order instructions could be can be inserted here, which doesn't actually have this kind of dependency. Okay.
Okay, I think it's clear to all, and we came to the end of the session. And thank you very much, Dr. Nisha Haidas, for a very informative, wonderful and interactive section on basic embedded system concepts for SoC architecture. And we have discussed so many things from the basics of SoC architectures, processes, memory hierarchy, caches, physical and virtual addressing, etc. It was a very good section. And on behalf of ERNDC and myself, I thank you for being our resource person for this section. And I thank all the participants for attending. And we expect you in our coming webinars too. And thank you once again all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.